And we are going to start with the first question, which is, what editing advice do you have for a new author who can't afford an editor but doesn't want their first self-published book to look bad? So this is a great question, and thank you for asking it. This is really hard because as an industry, a lot of times people come at this from a position of privilege and say, oh, you shouldn't self-publish without editing. And that's why self-published books are all bad, because there's no editing. And really, there's just this huge position of privilege. And I must admit that for a long time, I was one of those people who said, oh, you have to have a book edited before you can have it released. I have since changed my philosophy on this because I think there's a lot of people out there who have amazing stories to tell and can't always afford an editor. And I don't think that those people should be held back from publishing their book or sharing their book. So I do have some advice for when you can't afford an editor. I have lots of editing advice for when you can't afford an editor, and that is all included in Before You Hit Send. If you're curious about Before You Hit Send, you can find that on my website, www.angelajames.co. So Before You Hit Send, there's information about Before You Hit Send on there. But if you can't afford Before You Hit Send, if you can't afford an editor, then my next advice is to make sure that you're going through as much free information that's good on the internet about self-editing, that you have a self-editing checklist set up, and that you're following a process, so that there's some logical way that you're editing, so that you know that you're not missing things. Taking craft classes that you can afford is another way to approach editing. And then, other than classes, finding really solid critique partners that can offer you critique, finding beta readers that will give you great feedback. And I don't just mean beta readers who will be like, or critique partners who will be like, oh, this is great, you should publish this as is, but people who can give you critical feedback from a reader's point of view. The other thing that you can do is swap with somebody. If there's a particular skill that you have, you could swap with somebody who's great at editing and ask them to give you some editing advice. Maybe you can find somebody who will edit a few pages for you just to show some of the things that you might need to work on as far as copy editing and proofreading and line editing. And you can take that advice forward and apply it to your whole manuscript. So I would say that just because you can't afford editing doesn't mean you can't publish, but it also doesn't mean that you shouldn't edit the book at all. It just means that you're going to have to find new ways, different ways of editing the book yourself, and making sure that you're giving the reader the best reader experience possible. So it's not that I'm saying, yeah, go ahead, publish without editing. I'm just saying you just need to think different about it and find ways that you are going to create a situation in which you are giving the best reader experience. The reader experience is very important. But the one thing that I will tell you is that when we talk about reader experience and we talk about editing, focus on creating the best story possible with the best characterization possible, because those are the two things that the readers are going to be reading for. I have found through self-publishing that readers will forgive or not even notice typos or missing commas. Not to say that those things don't detract from the reading experience, because they absolutely can. But when a reader falls in love with the story and characters, they're going to forgive a lot. So I just want you to make sure that you are spending time developing the story, developing the characters, getting feedback on those things. Don't just worry about line editing and commas and copy editing and proofreading. Those things are important, but the story and the characters are most important. So again, I don't want to introduce barriers to self-publishing for you. I'm trying to help you find ways of thinking differently about moving around the barriers. And as your book starts to make money, you can hire a professional editor, you can hire a professional line editor, copy editor, proofreader. As you begin to work on your craft, that's the other thing, is that you can go back and make changes. Here's the other thing that I want you to keep in mind. If you are a new writer, not every book does need to be published. So sometimes those early books should just be practice, learning your craft. Don't think that just because it was written, it needs to be published. So if you're feeling like you can't afford craft classes, you're not able to find critique partners, and you're just struggling with your writing, or you're just learning how to write a manuscript, then write the next story, and then write the next story. So you're going to improve with every story that you wrote. So don't just think, I wrote this one, I have to publish it. Don't be in a rush. Remember that some things are just for practice. So that's okay as well.